Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us from all over the world for our event, the Canticle of the Birds. My name is Shiva Tabatabainajad. I'm an alumna of Georgetown's School of Foreign Service and Georgetown's Persian Studies program. I will be assisting with the question and answer portion of the event. If at any time you'd like to pose a question, please use the Q&A box so that we may address that question during our Q&A portion. As always, questions are welcome in both English, Finglish, and Persian. I have the pleasure of introducing the founder and director of the Persian Studies program at Georgetown University, Professor Fatima Mostofi.
خانم‌ها و آقایان سلام. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our attendees from around the globe. On behalf of the Persian Studies program of Georgetown University, I would like to welcome you to the Canticle of the Birds, our fifth Jolly News lecture series in the form of a webinar. We really appreciate your presence today and your continued interest in our cultural events. Let me also extend my gratitude to the Jolly News family, without whom these cultural events could not take place. My special thanks to our recent contributors through our fundraising campaign and all of the Persian Studies alumni, students, colleagues, friends, and supporters who lift us up with their kind words and encouragement. I now have the pleasure of turning over our renowned Dr. Ahmad Karimi-Hakkak, who will introduce the prestigious panelists, Dr. Leili Anvar, Dr. Michael Barry, Mrs. Wendy Jehlen, and lead the discussion. Dr. Hakkak, please.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's a distinct honor and a high privilege, really, to be moderating this august panel that I love, that I already love because I know some of the people and I know their accomplishments and I've learned from them tremendously. You're going to have a mystical journey in about an hour and a half or whatever it takes. And this is going to be an illuminating journey where you will see the verbal, the visual, the historical, the personal, and in all kinds of facets, you will get to know one man and one work, Fariduddin Attar of Neyshabur. And his best work, in my estimation, Mantiqut, which I know Dr. Berry, one of our speakers, does not like the word language or conference for it, goes for the Canticle, and I think he has his own reasons. That's wonderful. I would like to also mention all of our speakers, each one contributing in a particular way to an enhanced understanding of this narrative, this poem, this long poem that Attar has written and has turned out to be his most cherished work. I am just a lowly historian of Persian literature, and so when it comes my turn, I will be speaking only about Attar in historical context, as well as Mantiqut or Canticle of the Birds in historical context. For now, let me simply introduce our speakers so you'll know for yourselves how much talent goes into this has gone into this program and what you're going to enjoy in the hour and some that will follow. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Leili Anvar, and I've had the pleasure of being a participant in some of her conferences and like her work tremendously. Dr. Leili Anvar is a professor of Persian language and literature at the Institut National de Langues et Civilsations Orientales, or the famous INALCO in Paris, where she is also the head of the Iranian languages department. She holds a chronicle dedicated to literature and spirituality in the magazine Le Monde de Religion, and co-hosts a weekly radio program on spiritual issues. Boy, would I have loved to have been in Paris or been able to benefit from her insights. Dr. Anvar attended the École Normale Supérieure and studied Persian and English literature and civilization at the University of Sorbonne Nouvelle in Paris, where she received her PhD in Persian literature with a thesis entitled From Paradox to Unity, the study of the Divan of Shams, which is, of course, by Rumi, the famous Mawlavi, and another spiritual work, that a poetic work that we all have read, and I think everybody should. Dr. Anvar's publications include Le Genre Hagiographique, and that's an important point in her work because, uh, you know, this work is a prose work, the Tazkiratul Awliya in Persian, and Attar in it kind of, you know, deals with the saints that have gone before him and have established a tradition. And, you know, it has been translated into English by my friend, Professor, the name will come to me, of Indiana University. Anyway, she has also done Nom de Personne en Islam, which is a French translation of Anne-Marie Schimmel's Islamic names. And she has done a lot of other works that I will not have time to enumerate for you. But let me just say that she is a treasure in herself and carries that treasure of insight into Persian literature in every way. And I think we are going to have the benefit of hearing her after I am done with my introductions. Our second speaker, Dr. Michael Berry, I've had the honor of sharing the stage with him in 2015 at Yale University. He was born in New York City, raised in France, and partly in Afghanistan, and received his BA in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. So he's a truly international scholar of note. His postgraduate diploma is in anthropology from Cambridge University, his MA from McGill University, and his PhD from École des Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. Dr. Berry has served as a lecturer in Islamic culture at Princeton University from 2004 to 2017, and is university professor at the American University of Afghanistan in Kabul since 2017. Over the past 35 years, his work in Afghanistan, sometimes in the most dangerous battlefield conditions, which you know, of course, from the news, has ranged from anthropological research to defense of human rights and coordinating humanitarian assistance in the field for the Paris-based International Federation for Human Rights, Médecins du Monde, and the United States as well. Dr. Berry has also is a recognized expert on Islamic art, and that's an intriguing aspect of his specialty, to turn the verbal into the visual and to bring in the visual in order to interpret and comment on the verbal. These are arts that have developed in different periods in the Persian world, and so Dr. Berry is unique in making the links between these two mediums of understanding. Anyway, he has reorganized the New York Metropolitan Museum's galleries of Islamic art prior to their reopening in the fall 2011, and has served as a consultant to the Aga Khan Trust for Culture on a variety of museum issues and lectures. Dr. Berry has published extensively, as you can imagine, in both his writing languages, which is English and French, and his academic works have been translated into other European languages, half a dozen of them. And he holds 7 literary prizes from France and Iran, in addition to many scholarly articles or chapter contributions to international art exhibitions. He has contributed to collective academic studies of the great medieval Persian poets. Michael Berry worked for several years with the French publisher Diane de Sellier. In 2012, de Sellier published Berry's study of on the illumination of the Canticle, which is the text that's going to be the object of our analysis today, the Canticle of Birds, and by the classical Persian poet Attar, based on the great 15th century. As you know, in Middle Ages, there was no print. And so all of these are manuscripts. And he has used the 15th century manuscript housed in the Metropolitan Museum and other medieval codices, with the original Persian text edited by Shafi'i Katkani and French and English versions by Leili Anvar and Dr. Richard Davis. So you see, these two scholars, along with other scholars, have made all this available to us and understandable to a 21st century student of Persian poetry. As the 25th anniversary book of the publishing house, the Cellier, published by Michael Berry's project, Shakespeare in Venice. That's an intriguing part of it. We are not going to be discussing about this today, but it's a wonderful addition to know the range of work, the scholarship that Professor Berry brings to bear on our understanding of the Persian world. Finally, there's Dr. Wendy Jehlen. And Dr. Wendy Jalen is the founder and artistic director of ANIKAYA. Her career has been marked by international explorations. That's a wonderful thing. Study and creative collaboration. She received her bachelor's degree in ritual and performance from Brown University and her Master of Theological Studies from Harvard Divinity School, with a focus on the intersection between performance and religion. Intriguing topic again, intersection. Wendy engages in collaborations across languages, cultures, and media and genres. Her work questions the boundaries that we imagine between ourselves. All of these boundaries are imaginary, of course, and seeks to break down these imagined walls through an embodied practice of radical empathy. That's interesting. That embodied empathy is a wonderful concept to think about, and we'll be witnessing some of that today. This practice takes her around the world to conduct workshops, collaborations, and performances, which she calls collectively dance diplomacy. Dance diplomacy. I wish all the success in the world for dance diplomacy. She is a Fulbright scholar, a Fulbright specialist, and arts envoy to the U.S. Department of State. Her unique approach to choreography incorporates elements of Bharata Natyam, Odyssey, Capoeira, and other texts in Western African dance, American Sign Language, poetry, and visual vernaculars, and a wide range of contemporary movement and theater forms. Her emotionally powerful and choreography has been created and performed in the US, in Benin, in Botswana, in Brazil, Burkina Faso, and many other places, Canada, from all the way to Japan and Korea, and other places. So as you see, we have a wide and deep range of scholarship present in this hour and a half. So gear up and sit down and enjoy the whole show, and we'll be discussing among us at some point, and you'll benefit from that as well. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it to our first speaker, Dr. Leili Anvar, please.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation from all around the world. I just have to thank the organizers and Georgetown University for convening this gathering, and I must apologize for my English that has become terribly rusty in the years, because I haven't spoken English for, I think, 3 years now. It's horrible. So really, excuse me if my English is not as good as it should be for someone who did some English studies in the past. So this Canticle of the Birds is in many ways, and I would say really with no exaggeration, a real masterpiece, both in a poetic and narrative way and in a spiritual sense. Actually, I have translated this Canticle of the Birds, or Manteroteir. I have translated into French under the title Le Cantique des Oiseaux, with illustrations, as Dr. Karimi-Hakkak said, commented upon by Michael Barry, from whom I've learned so much. And I really want to thank him for all the things that he has taught me during these years of work on the Canticle of the Birds. So, so I've spent 5 years of my life with Attar and with this text. And each time I read it again, I study some points with my students, or I give a lecture in any circumstances. Well, I realize that there are still things to say, and there are still things to discover. And every time, new things happen to me. So that's why I want to really thank you for this panel, because again, I thought, what can I say in 15 minutes that would bring something even to myself before bringing something to the audience? So I thought about the structure. This is something I have not really explained in the introduction and the notes to my translation, although it's a very important point. And I think that structure, the whole structure of the Mantiqote reflects actually one verse in the Quran in which it is said, "From God we are, and to him we shall be returned." And my idea today is to show you that actually the whole structure of the Mantiqote, and particularly, of course, the general story and some of the stories inside the main story, actually are there to illustrate this single verse, which is also a whole human program, or a whole spiritual program, as the Sufis consider it. So we all know, or I suppose that the audience knows, that the Canticle of the Birds tells the story of all the birds in the world who are in quest of the sovereign majesty of birds, or their sovereign majesty, that we will discover is called Simorgh. And these birds take flight guided by the hoopoe towards this majesty, her majesty Simorgh. Maybe in the discussion we can discuss precisely that point, why I say, and I think Michael Barry agrees with me, that it is her, or her majesty Simorgh, as well as why we decided that Canticle or Cantique is much better a translation than conference or language. But at this point, maybe we will keep that for later. So at the end of the journey, the birds plunge into the fire of Simorgh to unite with her. And it's really a fusion in fire, which is rather original, because usually in Sufism, the souls are supposed to merge into the ocean of the Supreme Being. Here, they merge into an ocean of fire and not an ocean of water. And I think, of course, this is very interesting. This is very important to note, because it is related to the nature of Simorgh. And again, I won't trespass on what I think Michael Barry has prepared for you, but Simorgh is an antique bird which is associated to the sun. It is a sunbird, and that's why when they arrive to the being of Simorgh, actually they merge into her fire. Now, in the beginning of the story, when describing the Simorgh for the birds, the hoopoe, that is going to be their guide through the journey, says that Simorgh's first appearance was in China, that means in the Far East, where the sun rises. And then that Simorgh let one of her feathers drop on the world, and this was the beginning of creation. And this gives to the world all the colors and the forms. A little later, the hoopoe, again explaining, describing what Simorgh is, tells to the birds that Simorgh cast in the time of creation, cast unnumbered shadows on the earth. On each one fixed her eyes, and each gave birth. Thus we were born, the birds of every land are still her shadows. Think and understand. This is the translation by Dick Davis. So there is, the Hoopoe explains that there is a certain kind of identity of nature between the birds, that is the souls, the human souls, because the birds are the metaphors of the human souls. So between the human souls and God. And here and there, the Hoopoe presents Simurgh as the origin, the matrix, so to speak, of the whole universe, as the womb of whatever exists or comes into existence. Then, of course, in the end, there is also a very famous pun, because only 30 birds arrive to the end of the journey, and 30 birds is said in Persian, Simurgh. So they see in Simurgh, they see in Simurgh, Simurgh. So they see 30 birds. But this is the very famous pun, the most famous pun in the whole universal literature, I suppose. But this is not what I'm trying to say today. There is another pun that has been completely ignored by everybody. I've never seen it pointed in any study of the Mantiqoter. And this verse goes in Persian. So it's the Simurgh who is talking to the birds at the end of the journey, when the birds have discovered that actually there is an identity within themselves and the being of Simurgh. And the Simurgh says at the end of her speech, محو ما گردید در صد زناز تا به مادر خویش را یابید باز. So she tells them to actually to unite with her being, so that تا به مادر خویش را یابید باز. Usually it's translated, and it's correct, because grammatically this means in order to find yourselves in me, in us, because Simurgh has the we of majesty when she speaks. So, but in Persian, ta be ma dar also sounds like in your mother, in the mother, sorry. So I believe, although I didn't see it myself when I translated the work, that actually this madar, on which the speech of Simurgh ends, and virtually the journey of the birds ends, I think it is absolutely essential. And it points to this idea that God is Rahman and Rahim, that is, of course, it means most clement and generous, but actually Rahman and Rahim are also of the same etymology than Rahem, which means precisely the womb. And it gives really the impression that Simurgh is the mother of all beings, and that the journey of the birds is a journey towards their original womb. And again, we find that in the main story, this idea that actually we are from the divine womb and we have to return to the divine womb. And it's quite interesting that this pun has never been noticed, even by myself, who translated this work and spent 5 years with it. Whereas I believe that Attar makes such a use of puns. It's so important in his work. All the important moments are moments where he uses puns that we just cannot imagine that it's just by chance that bema dar, which is actually an inversion of the usual grammar, is just here by chance. So I just can't believe it. Now, I will not have the time to explain how the story of Sheikh San'an is also a story about we are from God, and to God and to him we shall be returned. Suffice it to say that because I think now I've talked 15 minutes now already. So if I just have 5 minutes, I just wanted to say that the story of Sheikh San'an is a very important story because it's the longest story within the main story. And it's a story that the Hoopoe tells the birds after a series of questions and excuses that that are invented by the birds because, or are expressed by the birds because they don't want to make the journey, even though they desire to go for the quest of Seymour. They are also afraid of making such a journey. And in the end, the hoopoe tells them the story of Sheikh San'an in order really to motivate them. And it works, because after this story, they start really their journey. Although after a while, they also again stop and they also have a new series of questions. But at least the story really convinces them that they have to go through that very difficult journey that is going to be a hard trial. And the story of Sheikh San'an, to put it in a few words, because it's 500 baits, which is a lot, because the whole story is 4,700 baits, almost a little more. But 500 baits is a lot for a story within the story. And basically, the story is the story of a sheikh that is a great master of Islamic studies and also a great Sufi spiritual mystic master who has 400 disciples and who lives in Mecca, that is in the house of God. And he sets into a journey, he sets out for a journey and he goes to Rome or to Byzantium, and there he falls in love with a Christian girl. And he abandons Islam in the process of falling in love for many reasons. Again, I don't have really time to explain all the details of the story. And in the end of the story, once he has gone through Christianity, gone through the experience of love, the experience of detaching himself of everything that he knew before, even of his pride that was his religious and spiritual station, he can return to Mecca, that is, to the house of God. And again, I think there is a paradigm of journey from a source to somewhere else, which is a place of danger, a place where there is no sun, it's night, everything is shadowed, and at the same time, it is a place where we can discover through the experience of beauty. We can make somebody, or the birds or Sheikh San'an can make through the experience of the vision of beauty. He can experience the taste of love, the taste of desire first, and the taste of love after that. And again, you have at the center of the Manterote, the most important story is mirroring the whole story, in the sense that it's a journey through love that is also a journey from where we come from to where we come from. And we have to pass through the world for doing this journey, for really experiencing and tasting this journey. And this story is also echoed many times in the whole book. And again, we can discuss it later if you have any questions on this. But that's what the most important thing for me is to say that by doing this, really Attar creates echoing themes, mirroring themes, and this idea of echo and mirror is at the center of his aesthetics, because it is at the center of his spiritual conception of life and his spiritual conception of what a human journey should be. That is actually a journey from God to God by passing through our divine human nature.
Thank you very much. That was quite a revelation, particularly that Bemadar and Bemadar is wonderful to contemplate forever. You're right. Attar does have this proclivity for wordplay and for punning, and there are lots of puns in Ilahiname and in Asrarname and so on and so forth. So he does have that, and it would be surprising why we have never noticed Bemadar could mean to mother as well. Thank you so very much. I really, truly appreciate it. Our next speaker is Dr. Barry, and I associate him with a lot of depth, much depth, and more breadth. And so I look forward to hearing you, Dr. Barry. Please enlighten us. Thank you.
I'll do my best. And what is extraordinary is the theme of the bird as a mother bird is fully borne out in the art. And so I think that Leili's contribution in today's session is absolutely fundamental. I absolutely accept Modar, the mother. I'm going to ask my help here to get the image up, and I'll sort of take you through a few images that may illustrate what Leili has been introducing us to. Where do we have the screen? And we can see the whole thing. There. Do you see this image? Tasvir Dilan?
With a little delay, yes, I see it now.
You see it now. Okay, yes. So if I can leave it at this level, at this height, it's clear enough. You see it correctly?
It is for me.
And Lady John, Didanish Mitoni, can you see it?
Bale, bale.
Okay, so just a very brief introduction. It seems in the histories of civilization that when the greatest minds are attracted to one form of expression, they continue until they seem to reach a pinnacle, and then they shift to another form of expression. I've always been struck by the fact that the genius of the Persian-speaking world expressed itself in the 11th, 12th, 13th to 14th centuries, essentially in fabulous literature. And from the 14th century, it seems as though many great minds are turning to the illustration of that literature through painting. There's a parallel that you see, for example, among the Italians. The 14th century is the great century of Italian poetry. After Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, what do? Well, you become Botticelli and you paint. And that seems to be why we have this strange dichotomy between the zenith, the ouge of Persian language literature, which corresponds to the generation of Attar between the late 12th and early 13th century, and the zenith of the painting, which is late 15th, early 16th century. And the paintings are meditations on the poetry to such extent that the more we know the poetry, the more we realize the extraordinary beauty and depth of these paintings, and the paintings guide our eyes even better to read the poetry, because the painters, knowledgeable of the poetry, are looking at it practically the way it should be understood. So this first picture, yes, this first picture shows a group of Sufis dancing the typical sama that we associate with Maulana. It is a page which was cut out of a Diwan-e-Hafiz, copied in the late 15th century in the kingdom of Herat. And look what we discover. Okay, just there. Do you see this character who is weeping? If I go, he is here. Do you see this character? This character refers to what these people are doing. They are dancing to the very first verses of the Masnawi-e Ma'nawi of Maulana, of Rumi. Bishnu aznai chun shikayat mikonad, was Jedi ha shikayat mikonad, hikayat mikonad, as neistam ta mara bubridand, as nafiram marduzan nalidand. When they have listened to my song, men and women have wept. So he who weeps is Maulana himself. And this is the earliest representation of Maulana that we know of in all Persianate art. It is the work of the great master Bezad. We continue. Here is a Masnawi Manawi illumination created in the kingdom of Herat in the abstract, and then in Safawi times in Tabriz, these figures were added. So you see the dance of the dervishes, the king with the typical Safawi turban watching, and here the painter adds his commentary, which is the poet beneath the tree is Maulana. So Maulana is the poet who weeps. He weeps over this lower world where we are like pawns, white and black, played upon the chessboard of this lower world's existence. And the landscape is purely symbolic. You have the tree of life, which rises over the water of life in tribute to Maulana, recognizing him as a saint. And what we find constantly in these 15th and 16th century paintings, to which I myself am first paying attention, is that while this tree is in autumn, this cherry blossom is in spring, which means it cannot possibly be a real landscape. These are two aspects of the flowering of the soul, and then those souls which are not reached by the water of life are like dry, tormented, sterile sticks. Winter, autumn, spring, summer. So back to this painting, we know that when the ceremony occurs today in the very stylized costume that was put together in 17th century Turkey, but before then, whatever people were wearing is what they danced in. And you have the salutation, and we have here the Prime Minister of Herat, Mir Ali Sher Nawai, recognizable because he's always shown leaning on a staff, and famous for his Turkish translation of the Mantiqut Attar as the Lisan Attar, the language of the birds, and also because he commissioned, with the permission of his king, the most beautiful manuscript in the world of Attar's great poem. And by his side is always represented Jami. So Jami and Mir Ali Sher are saluting each other. And here you have Hafiz, whom we can recognize because he wears the pink, the wine-soaked tunic, the kabaye gulgun, the rose tunic. So I was frustrated by not being able to find Attar. Certainly, this identification, Mir Ali Sher Nawai, and we can just compare by Mahmoud Muzahib and by Bezad. Here he is. Here is Jami, Nawai and Jami. Who this is? Could it be Attar? Who knows? But let's continue. Here, in the famous illustration of the story of Sheikh San'an in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I find a Safawi, Shah Abbas period representation again of Mir Ali Sher Nawai, as if he is listening to Attar himself in order to do what Leili did several centuries later, which was translate it into a new masterpiece in his own language. So here is Attar. Attar, showing the story of Sheikh San'an to which Leili referred, explaining the story, and the Turkish translator listens attentively to Attar. So something I would often suggest to our Iranian friends, in all these classical editions that you are publishing of the great poets, you come up with these strange 1960s, 1970s imaginary portraits of all these poets. Why not popularize much earlier representations of these poets and put them on the cover so that they become familiar to the entire Iranian readership. And here we have Attar himself, at least as seen by Habibullah Mashhadi, working in Isfahan and in the reign of Shah Abbas, Attar Nawai. So the beautiful manuscript, which is in the Metropolitan Museum now, is adorned with this fabulous leather tooled gold cover, which was created by order of Shah Abbas for this manuscript, originally from Herat. The calligraphy is by the greatest master of his time, Sultan Ali Mashhadi, working at the court of Herat at the end of the 15th century, considered irreplaceable. So the marbled margins were added by command of Shah Abbas all around, calligraphy already a century old. Another wonderful page from this manuscript. Here is one commissioner, Sultan Hussein, in 1487, and Shah Abbas, who continues the work. It's a work in progress. But I want to bring you as quickly as possible to the mystery of the Simur. Here is the wonderful bird. Here is Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, the hoopoe, and you have the association of the great bird and the dragon. Together, the bird and the dragon, as in Chinese art, signify the totality of the cosmos. The painter, who seems to have been the young Rezaie Abbasi himself, wanted to show that Solomon and the Queen of Sheba together represent the perfect human being. Insane Kamil. They sit together on the same throne. Their minister, Asaph, recognizes that this is the true king, this is the true queen, and presents the seal of kingship. The demons and the dragon are all in submission, as are all the animals, to signify that the perfect human being, a wonderful conjunction of man and woman in their perfection, are the masters of all the bodily sensations and impulses, which can be compared to various members of the animal kingdom or the demons. And above, you have the direct indication of Rezaie Abbasi thinking about Attar's poem, with all the birds flying towards this wonderful sunbird. I'm not sure about how much time I would have to take you through these manifestations, but this image can serve already for all of them. Artistically speaking, the Persian world was familiar, certainly by the time of Attar, and then much more in the wake of the Mongol invasions, with the Chinese representation of the sunbird, the Chinese phoenix, Feng Huang. But the Chinese representation itself was derived from earlier Sasanian Persian representations of this great bird. Now, there's a pun, Simur, 30 birds, but the old Persian, Avestic Persian, for this wonderful bird is a feminine, which is what Leili has been referring to. We'll come to the mother, we'll see her. In Old Persian, Saena Merera, which means my lady eagle bird. Saena is a feminine, and it means an eagle. Merera is mur, of course. So Saena Merera eventually becomes Simur in medieval and modern Persian. And this is a manifestation of sunlight itself. God, when revealing out of the innermost mystery of the divine all visible things, is compared to a burst of sunlight and it seems in universal art. And this is why this image had such potency. The burst of sunlight is in from Mexico to ancient Egypt to ancient Mesopotamia to China is represented as an eagle or a falcon, a predatory bird. That she is feminine, we will see, as I think we can find in the next group of images. Oh, you know what you gave me? You gave me the Sheikh San'an story. So do you want me to continue with Sheikh San'an? I was
Briefly, please.
very, very, very briefly. Okay. Central to this mystery, here represented by Behzad, and here represented by another painter from Herat 100 years later, Muhammadi, is the idea that the divine can be revealed to the devotee in a female aspect. One of the code terms for the revelation of the divine is kashful mahjub, meaning the unveiling of that which is veiled, which is the very earliest Sufi treatise in Persian in existence by Hujwiri, 11th century. And the idea of Leili sitting in the mihrab is a pictorial conceit by Master Behzad when young Qais, who will become the future madman for love, beholds Borqa ze jamal khish bardosht, the wind has blown away the burqa, the veil from her beauty. He beholds the reflection of the divine upon her countenance. Lady Motherbird, Simur, or Leili are both manifestations of the divine precisely in a civilization where the obstacles between the sexes were so huge that often the most exciting moment in the life of a young man was when he beheld his bride's face for the first time on the wedding night, and the veil was lifted, and you had the kashful mahjub, which for so many young men was almost probably one of the most glorious experiences in their lives. And this is what Majnun has seen. And this is why the painter shows her sitting in the niche of prayer of the mosque. There's no doubt of that. When Muhammadi, 100 years later, looking at this painting of love, sees the symbols, the tree of life, remember, in all the multiplicity of its autumn colors, leaning over the young poet who has recognized the reflection of the divine upon the face of Leili. He looks at her, and her eyebrows remind him of the niche of prayer, the mihrab. So when Muhammadi reinterprets this painting by Behzad, he shows Leili as queen of heaven. She sits in the mihrab, and the Narcissi, these Abhar al-Ashiqin or Nargis, are symbols of human eyes, so that the queen of heaven contemplates herself through the eyes of her lovers, and it further signifies that, like in the mysticism of Ibn Arabi, the divine looks upon the divine through the eyes of the faithful. So it's an extraordinary pictorial rendition of some of the most profound concepts of Persian literature and Sufi spirituality. I don't know if I have much more time for this. I might show you a few more images, but it's really up to you.
We may have more time during the discussion, Dr. Berry.
Certainly. But at least it gives you an idea of some of the themes that we work with.
If it's within a minute or two, go ahead.
Stop share. Yeah, stop share.
Okay. Are you done, Dr. Barry?
Well, I'm done for this time, and then for the question and answer, I want to show the mother bird.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so very much. Once again, a very insightful presentation, which prepares us for the kind of empathy that that Dr. Jelen's performance dance is going to really, have us feast our eyes on. So go ahead, Dr. Jelen, please.
While I'm setting it up, I think you'll see that I'm coming from a very different world into this this discussion, and it's really been wonderful so far, and I'm learning a great deal and finding connections to my other work. So thank you both so much so far, and I will try to share this. Let's see what happens.
Eu me perco em você e você em mim.
あなたは私、私はあなた。
Aku orang ngerti
あなたが私
yen
な
kau
のか、
kui kui
私が
E você.
あなたなのか。
Thank
thank you. This performance is about an hour and a half long, so you're getting a tiny, tiny, tiny set of snippets of the performance. Just a little bit of background. The performance itself is built on the structure of, I suppose, Canticle of the Birds, although we used conference, but it's built on the structure of the poem and the emotional journey of the poem, the spiritual journey of the poem, but the actual individual stories that are depicted throughout the performance were gathered from the birds, the dancers themselves, who are all migratory people. We're all people who sort of live in the international space. None of us live and stay in our home countries. And from a series of workshops that we gave mostly in New England, but also in West Africa, where these were story gathering workshops. Where it's a movement experience that results in the gathering of stories, and the participants in these workshops were primarily immigrants and refugees. One of the most fruitful was a group of unaccompanied minor refugees in Worcester, Massachusetts. So people who had come to the United States, usually through a number of different countries, and landed in Worcester, Massachusetts when they were still under 18. So some of them very young. And their stories are then portrayed throughout the performance. The dancers themselves are, as you can probably tell from countries around the world, with very, very different backgrounds and very, very different movement languages and movement practices and life histories. And the music is also made by 3 different composers who collaborated together to make this soundscape. And then you've also seen the projection. The projection in our performance is the hupo. We didn't want to have the hupo, who is our leader, be of any particular identifiable gender or race. And so our solution was to make it a projection, which resulted in, I think, one of the strongest, to me, one of the strongest parts of the performance, which is this evolving imaginary creature that is our conscience and our guide, but our individual consciences take this form, and it takes many different forms. And the first form that you saw is this calligraphic bird. That's much more clearly a bird, but sometimes it evolves into a flock of just feathers or a flock of letters. There's one point where it is our passports falling apart. There's another point where it takes the form of a blue pearl, which is from an image that came from one of the workshops. The blue pearl, which is insight. And at another point, it takes the form of a line of poetry, which didn't appear in the video, but it is just a line of poetry scrolling across one of the screens. So the hupo becomes poetry. And there are points when the hupo disappears also. There are certain valleys where the hupo has left us and we have to call him back. So I guess that's, I think that my presence here is sort of to bring what is happening today with this poem, because there's a tremendous amount of work in all media that is happening and has been happening for millennia. With Dr. Berry talking about the wonderful paintings and all of the visual art representations, and then there have been innumerable operas and plays and God knows how many dance interpretations of this incredible work. While we were creating Conference of the Birds, while we were creating our own version, there was a new translation that came out in English. There was a play being rehearsed at the same time. There was an opera being rehearsed at the same time, and a choral work all being created at the same time, and that's always the case. So this is just one of many, many, many possible interpretations of this text that has been speaking to the human condition for
Well, thank you
1,000
so
years.
much. Thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about. And this was a fantastic depiction of the narrative. I get a sense that this was focused on the valleys. And while
Yes.
the name and the order of the valleys differ in different Sufi orders, this is Attar's ordering of the valleys. So when he talks about the valley of Talab or quest, it's really the beginning of a movement, of a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And when the second is the valley of love, it's because some birds like the nightingale have been left behind. They have not agreed to join the birds on their trip. So any quest begins with love of a destination somewhere. And the third, you gain insight, but by gradations. And I think that's the concept of marifat. Find you in unit 4, in valley 4, you get to istighna, and that insight gives you a richness that makes you detached from everything else, needless of anything else. And that's when you come to see the oneness, the tawheed, or the fifth valley. Then that bewilderment takes over, the hayrat, and finally the valley of faqr or fana, or nothingness, realizing that you really are nothing, a nothingness in yourself, but only in the plurality, as Dr. Anvar mentioned at the end. It's really in the madar, or in Simur, that these birds find their own self. But it's not the lower self. It's no longer the nafs al-ammare, but it's that kind of thing that has made you all of these. I think on one level, Attar's narrative is also a narrative of authority. Why is it that Hudhud or Hoopoe really is selected as the leader to guide these birds to Simor? And I think there's that concept of dual authority, of charisma and hereditary authority. So charismatic authority comes from within you, whereas hereditary authority, that's his links with her links with Solomon, is the one that convinces all the birds to obey and to get going. So again, much can be said about this one narrative as it relates to Persian literature, to the history of Persian literature. Let me just point that Attar sits at the middle of a dynasty that Rumi supposedly has established, Sanai, Attar, and Rumi himself. And so, and this is the line that goes up all the way to metaphysical mysticism, metaphysical Sufism. There is another line, a line that keeps its social commitment and makes it more of a part of a Sufi than Attar and Mawlavi do. And that is the line that starts with Sanai again, but moves to Nizami and Saadi. But that's a different thing. One question that I have for Dr. Berry, and maybe Dr. Berry, you can enlighten us on this. Isn't it historically true that in the 16th and 17th century, which you mentioned, Sama is just not part of the ceremony? Nobody Samas anymore. That the whole tradition seems to have died, and these depictions are depictions of a past Sufism, of Sufism, a history of Sufism, if you will. If you enlighten us on that, I would appreciate it.
As far as the paintings would testify, in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Sama was performed, but it was performed in a rather amateur fashion, with people participating in the costumes they happened to be wearing in their everyday life. Where the Sama seems to take on this very stylized ritual aspect is in Ottoman Turkey in the 17th century, with that particular costume with the flaring skirt, as these people move in this very stylized choreography. How far does that choreography go back to Maulana himself. It's possible, it's in fact probable, but the testimony of the art is that the dancing seems to be very wild and abandoned in the 15th and 16th centuries when we have the visual testimony. And then in the 17th century, we get this very Ottoman Turkish choreography that is so disciplined, as probably befits a very military empire where everything is very disciplined. And we get that Sama as we see it today.
Yeah, thank you.
And may I add something? It's the fact that this painting was painted, if I understood you well, in Herat. And actually in the 15th century, we have in the works of Jami, the fact that he notwithstanding the fact that he is a Naqshbandi and that in the Naqshbandi order, Sama is not something commendable, he says himself, Jami says in his own works, that he's practicing Sama, and it's a kind of, it's a way to pacify your own soul from the busy lives, etc. And actually, he says that he practices Sama, and he precisely explains that Sama means listening to music and dancing spontaneously while listening to music. So in the 15th century, it was a practice, even among Naqshbandis who were not supposed to practice it.
And spontaneous.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anvar. Go ahead, Dr. Berry.
No, I wanted to call your attention to the mother bird, because I would hate if Dr. Anvar's brilliant intuition of the pun that closes the discourse of the Simur should go without its visual equivalent, which in a way attests to what I think is the accuracy of your perception. So can I have these images? Just briefly there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll try to go through some of these Simur images as quickly as possible. Here is the hoopoe leading all the birds, the soul birds, away from the world of the dragon, which is this lower material world, up towards the sunbird. Then those who know the poem are aware that you always have birds that simply cannot tear themselves away from this lower world. And here they are, usually the partridges with these blasted branches, which signify that their souls are dead, like these birds, whereas these birds are associated with spring, and they fly up the cosmic mountain, at the summit of which in the furthest east dwells the great bird. But okay, well, here is the very, very famous painting by Habibullah Mashhadi, working for Shah Abbas, of the hoopoe here, calling on all the birds of the world to follow in search of this wonderful bird in the distant east. And you recognize again what we should never forget anymore, how Persian painting constantly shows the water of life,
right,
and the tree of life bowing over the hoopoe, because the hoopoe here is the sacred character. And all these birds wisely turn their backs on the diabolic hunter with his musket, who is biting his finger with his mouth in his teeth, because he's so astonished and can't understand what the hoopoe is really talking about.
Thank you
Let's
very
come to
much,
the
Dr.
mother
Berry.
bird.
I'm getting notices that our time is getting up, and we definitely would like to get to questions. I myself have a lot of questions, but
Okay,
let's go
here's
to
your mother. Here's your mother.
Good. Okay. Let's
See it?
go to audience questions, or
Okay.
yeah. Shiva, take over, please.
Yes, thank you all. We have some questions from the audience. The first, can the panelists speak to the role of the female entity, human, bird, animal, in the Canticle of the Birds? The Simur is female, and Dr. Berry referred to the importance of Queen Sheba, for example. Is Attar a feminist?
Dr. Anvar?
Well, of course, it's not an accurate word to say that Attar is a feminist, because I don't know what we put under the name feminist, which is a very, very new word compared to the history of the world. But what I want to insist on is that we didn't say, I think, that Simor is a female. Neither did we say that Simor is a woman. Simor is a feminine entity, which is quite different. And I think it's not a social problem, or it's not a question of being a feminist or defending women's rights or something like that. It's just acknowledging the role of the feminine in every human being. And that's exactly what Michael showed us, actually, when he said that the perfection of humanity is the couple, man, woman, queen, king of Solomon with Queen of Sheba. It doesn't mean that it means that they are complementary, but also within the soul, within every human soul. So what Attar insists upon, and later, a little later, Ibn Arabi, it's the idea that and it's a very Jungian, it's a very modernist, I would say more than feminist, it's Jungian and modern way of thinking the question of the feminine and the masculine, and the fact that the anima and the animus, in the words of Jung, yes, should be connected, should meet each other in every human being in order to be able to make the ascent towards the origin, as I said. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad makes his ascent on a buraq, which is a mare, actually, with a woman's head.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anvar. I appreciate it. Shiva, go to the next, please.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Anvar. For Michael Berry, what is the shelf mark or name of this manuscript or folio, and where is it held? Referring specifically to the Solomon Sheba Simorgh dragon illumination.
Oh, that particular illumination is in the Freer Sackler Galleries in Washington, D.C., and it is an illustration to the tales of the prophets, Qisasul Anbiya, of Tha'alabi, in their Persian rendition. It was a manuscript commissioned for Shah Abbas, so it's the very last years of the 16th century, done in Isfahan by the master most associated with Shah Abbas, Rezaye Abbasi. So it can be seen, or I suppose with permission, at the Freer Sackler Galleries in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berry. Next.
Next one, thank you. We had a question for Ms. Wendy Jehlen of where to view the entire performance. I answered it live. She included a link, or by emailing her directly. This question is for everyone on the panel. Is this the first time in Persian literature that we find the manifestation of the divine presented as a female?
Who answers that?
Whoever.
Because
I think Dr. Anvar.
Well, the first time, no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that Nizami has set a very, very important example. Of course, Nizami and Attar are exact contemporaries, but if I'm not mistaken, in Leili Majnun, Nizami already presents this idea that Leili is a theophany, and Attar's Canticle of the Birds comes a little later. And I wouldn't say that Attar gives a hint that Simorgh is a female, as I said. We can deduce it, but it's not clearly said. Whereas Nizami says it clearly by comparing, for example, the body of Leili to the body of the Kaaba.
Thank you very much.
And you saw her in the niche of prayer, of course, also.
Shiva?
Yeah.
Yes, to see her in the niche of prayer is something that comes directly from Nizami, because Nizami says that Leili is is herself the light within the niche of prayer.
Thank you.
So the next question that we have is, to what extent is the thinking and message of Attar the the Canticle, Simur, and so forth, especially this emphasis on the feminine, have traction and acceptance in different schools of Islamic thought, from the Shia to the variations within the Sunni world, like Deobandi or Hanafi schools?
Well,
That takes
if
us
I
way,
can,
way far afield. But you know,
Okay.
maybe in a sentence or so. Go ahead, Dr. Barry.
okay, very quickly, I note that the most important love story in the Canticle of the Birds, the love of Sheikh San'an, a super Sunni Arab monotheistic type of mind, very male, goes to Constantinople, falls in love with a Greek Christian princess, and sees in her face a reflection of the divine, which leads him out of his very narrow interpretation. Now, I find what is extraordinary, and this is where the paintings provide so much food for thought as we ponder this literature, is that it was the most illustrated story, not only in Shi'i Iran, okay, we would expect that, but also among the Sunnis of the Uzbek kingdom of Bukhara, who were about the most super duper Sunnis of the 16th century in their constant fighting with the Shi'i of Iran, which means that the story held this extraordinary emotional appeal, both to Sunni and to Shi'i, to the extent that it is the story in Attar's book, which is the single most illustrated throughout Islamic art of the 16th century, meaning the zenith of the pictorial tradition.
I'm
So I hope I've
enjoying these
answered you.
explanations very much, but I don't want it said afterwards that the speaker dominated. So please go ahead and answer the questions only. Shiva, please.
Yes, for sure. So the next question that we have is, what kind of influence did this work have near the time of its publication, seeing as we're all speaking about it now in 2021? And I also want to add for Ms. Jehlen, your decision to choose this work in the form of dance. So both questions of what kind of influence did it have now, and also why this specific work did you choose to choreograph?
The first question was towards when it was originally written, no? The influence that it had.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. The first one is for everyone, anyone who wants to jump in.
So if you just a little, it's major. It's the influence of the Canticle of the Birds on Persian literature after its writing, its composition is just huge and massive. And the most important thing, again, it's something that I'm writing about now, so I'm not going to prove it. Don't worry, Dr. Karimi-Hakkak, I'm not going to explain all that. For one thing, the Masnavi of Rumi, which is one of the major works in Persian poetry and beyond, has been written in the same meter as a javab, what we call a javab, that is an answer to the Canticle of the Birds, because it's the same meter. And my idea is, and now I'm pretty sure of it, is that actually the structure of the Masnavi is based upon the structure of the Canticle of the Birds. And definitely the Masnavi is a continuation, an illustration that owes so much to the Canticle of the Birds. This is just one example, which is a massive, huge example, but you have many, many, many others. I mean, there is no, now that I've translated it, I know every time I read Persian poetry after the 13th century, Saadi has been massively influenced by Attar, particularly by the Mantarote, Hafez, Jami, Saeb, all of them. And even nowadays in contemporary poetry, but that Dr. Karimi-Hakkak is more aware of it than I am.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to jump in very, very quickly. After Attar's poem, the Simur becomes represented in the art of the region from Turkey all the way to India. And in India, the influence of the poem was so profound as all Hindu officials were expected to learn Persian to be able to operate in the Mughal court, that Garuda itself, the holy bird of Hinduism, came to be represented by the 16th century like the Simur of
Thank you so much.
Attar. And that the Simur is referred to is clear because the hoopoe is associated.
Thank you very much. Shiva, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I did want to give an opportunity for Wendy Jehlen to jump in here because, as we said, it was so profound. And now in 2021, people are still working on this piece of work.
I feel like my conversation is a little bit is in a very different, in a completely different world. However, I think the question was why this particular poem, and I work with a lot of different works of literature and not only poetry and including stories of contemporary people gathered in these workshops, which I consider to be literature as well. And this particular story, I had been working on since for about 20 years. And it was building itself throughout my career as I was gathering stories and meeting different dancers, and it was building itself in my mind. And then like all works of art, it happened when it was funded. And so it happened at a time, it was funded originally by the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art, Building Bridges program, at a time when, which continues, when Islamophobia was very much at the forefront of a lot of discussions in the art world, as well as in the world of politics. One of our composers couldn't come to the U.S. because of the Muslim ban, and so it was created in this time when there was a push from above for people to separate from each other, and rather than separate from each other, we took the story to come together. I was thinking when there was the discussion of the Canticle of the Birds versus the Conference of the Birds, and the question of translation and what do these words mean about what that is for us. I work a lot with deaf artists in the U.S. and other parts of the world. So one of my languages is American Sign Language and a little bit of other sign languages, and visual vernacular, which is a gestural system that is a bit outside of language and can be understood across deaf communities. And so I was imagining what my translation of Canticle of the Birds would be into that, and that is sort of what we were doing.
Thank you. We are pushing against our deadline, but Shiva, maybe one more question, please.
If the panelists have the time, and if you have the time, Dr. Hakkak, if we could go, we were trying to go to maybe even 3:40, if everyone's comfortable with that, 3:40 Eastern time.
Let's do it, but let's please just answer questions, and that will be all.
Definitely. So something that Wendy was saying as far as like the Islamic and, once the art was funded, leads into our next question for all of our panelists. How do you see this? Do you see this as religious or philosophical, or somewhere in between? Or you can't have one without the other? That's for anyone who wants to take it.
I'll jump in very quickly so I can leave the floor to everybody else. The Canticle of the Birds is one of those works of literary art which, while rooted in a particular tradition, Islamic, Persian, also dramatizes what we can almost call Jungian archetypes. And as such, the resonance is universal. And along with Dante's Divine Comedy and a few other poems like this that are rooted in their culture, but universal in their appeal, Attar's poem has certainly proved that it belongs to world literature and all peoples. I mentioned in an earlier intervention that even Hindus in the 16th century had adopted the poem and had conflated the Garuda bird with the Simur bird. And what the Hindus were able to do in the 16th century, I think Wendy has been doing with her choreography in the 21st.
Yes, I would just add the word spiritual. I think it's neither, it's religious, it's philosophical, it's mystical, it's poetic, it's all that. But I think all these aspects can be included into one unifying idea, is that it is a highly spiritual work. And that is why it is universal, because it's talking about something that's happening to the human souls wherever they live, whatever language they speak.
Good.
And that's why it's fantastic to have a dance, a choreography, because it's beyond language, and everybody can really recognize his own dynamic, spiritual dynamics in the whirling, in the dynamic of whirling.
Yeah, definitely. We also had an attendee ask, Wendy, if you could please finish your thought that you started as far as translation of Canticle versus conference.
So it was more a question of, okay, yes. My thought, finishing my thought consists of showing what the end of the sentence, which was, so it's a coming together, a speaking together, and a flocking together, is what we created in this piece. And I think that either one of those translations can be that. Canticle is I think an artistic speaking, right? A spiritual and artistic speaking. So that was the end of my sentence.
Well, actually, Canticle, it's because in the beginning, it was the French cantique. And why it was, we wanted to find something else. And I thought about this expression, Manteroter. And because Manteroter is something that is quoted by Solomon in the Quran, and King Solomon is supposed to have composed the Song of Songs, which is said in French, le Cantique des Cantiques. That is why finally I really felt that the right word was cantique, because manter doesn't mean conference. It has nothing to do with gathering or anything. The thing is that it's something that is said, and it is said in the language of the birds, which, by the way, is also the name of the language in alchemy. The alchemic language is called the language of the birds. That is, it's a language without words, precisely. That's why it's so interesting to dance it. But the thing is that a canticle in the end is a song. And what is interesting is the musical aspect of it, and also the reference to the Song of Songs, which is a song of love, a love poem, actually, supposedly composed by King Solomon. So all these things gathered together to convince me that the best translation was Cantique des Oiseaux, in French anyway. And then after that, I think it's Michael Barry who convinced Dick Davis, the English translator, that it would be a good idea also to have Canticle of Birds in English. But really the idea is to say that Manteroter is a specific language that King Solomon had learned from the birds. To that language, Solomon was initiated, actually. And that's why he could speak to the birds and he could understand the birds.
The poem also refers to Solomon's father, David, and to the songs which David raises to God. So there's that canticle aspect. And finally, we were also thinking of Saint Francis of Assisi, who addresses all the birds of the world because they are symbols of human souls. And it's the first poem in the Italian language, Il Cantico degli Uccelli, the song, the canticle of the birds.
I think it also, I mean, the word itself and the idea of this as a song, it also speaks to the reality of poetry, is that poetry is not usually experienced on the page. It's experienced,
Exactly.
spoken and sung. So to me, it's a really beautiful translation.
So do we adopt it?
Any more questions, Shiva?
Yeah, I think we do. I think we might only have time for maybe one more. One says, Dr. Anvar, you mentioned earlier, we have the aspects of God as Rahman versus Rahim, but the feminine aspect of Ramah, are there any parallels that can be drawn in this literary work to the Christian Trinity, as they also have the Father, Son, which are masculine, while the Holy Spirit is feminine, as we know from the Greek word? Not sure if that's a stretch, is what they have asked.
I don't know. I would say that there is more maybe in the Islamic world, the feminine has more to do with Maryam, that has a whole surah dedicated to her in the Quran. So I would rather say that it's really connected to the mother aspect of Mary, and actually to the virgin aspect of Mary, which is also connected to the character of Leili in the stories of Leili Majnun. But maybe Michael, who knows more about the different aspects of Christianity than I, has something to add.
Well, the confluence is in Greek, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit is feminine, pneuma. And the simur in the symbolism of the Sufis and of Attar is the Holy Spirit herself, expressing and thereby bringing creation into view. So these concepts are extremely linked, and it is wonderful to have such a feminine aspect of the divine.
Thank you, everybody. I myself had a lot of, again, historical questions. One would be, what is the relationship between Canticle of the Birds and Parliament of the Fowls, Chaucer's famous narrative? So, and that comes 2 centuries after Attar. So there is a whole line, as Umberto Eco says, all literature is intertextual. But obviously, it would not be a vain line. It would be very fruitful, I think, to take Canticle and put it at the center of a whole past and a more glorious future. And that's probably how it has enriched humanity, first the Persian speakers, and then the whole world, now that it has become universal. So I have nothing but admiration for what you have presented all, and I hope that all of these will find expression in some sort of work, whether it's artistic, such as Dr. Jelen's, or scholarly, such as ours. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Shiva, and I would like to thank Farima, and I would like to thank Georgetown University for the time they have given us. Thank you so very much. If there's no further comments, let this be the last word. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I just also would like to thank our attendees, thank Dr. Karimi-Hakkak, Dr. Anvar, Dr. Berry, and Ms. Jelen. I want to thank everyone for joining. Note that this was all recorded. We apologize if we didn't get to your question. We did have a lot of questions. Yes, today's event was recorded. Will be on Persian Studies website. Thank you, everyone. Khodafez, Khoda Nagahdar.
Thank you very much.